Hello, everyone. What time is it? Well, good morning from Lagos, Nigeria. Depending on what part of the world you are in. My name is Dr. Glory Edozian. I'm a thought leadership branding expert and LinkedIn top voice. And I have a very special guest with me here today. But before I introduce her, I want to say Happy International Women's Day. Yes. Happy International Women's Day. This is going to be an exciting day where we talk about how we can continue to empower women and include them at all levels of socio-economic strata as well. Put you in the chat. We've been having internet issues all day, but we're going to keep moving. We're going to keep moving. So if you're just joining in, please put your name and your city in the chat. And we'll stop to introduce you. If you have any questions, like I always say when I have my lives, yes. Sarah, can you hear me?
Now I can. You were frozen or I was frozen.
Our guest will soon be back on. Like I said earlier, internet has been topsy-turvy. Okay, so I'm going to introduce my guest, but if you are joining for the first time or if you're just joining, please put your name and where the city you're joining in from the chat. The conversation I'm having today is what does inclusivity look like for female leaders, executive leaders in the corporate space who are of African descent. As you are aware, today is International Women's Day, and the theme is inspire inclusion, right? So that's why we're having this conversation. And I have an amazing guest with me today. Her name is Serah Makka, and I'm super excited to have her. She is the One Africa Executive Director, and she has about 18 years of experience in the development and public sectors. She initially joined One as the Nigeria Director and successfully led the flagship Make Nigeria Stronger campaign, which resulted in an annual federal funding for basic healthcare provision. Amazing. Through her leadership working with Health Coalition and a global team, they've been able to raise 153 million released for Nigeria's healthcare sector each year. That's $153 million, I should say. Amazing. Prior to joining the One, she has global experience, having worked in Afghanistan, the United States, and Nigeria, providing solutions for public and social sectors. She has been recognized as one of the global top 35 under 35 in international affairs. Wow. For her work in global foreign policy, and became an Archbishop Desmond Tutu Fellow for her leadership in amplifying citizens' voices for better governance. She holds a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Florida and a master's degree in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School. Please join me in giving a huge welcome to my guest today, Serah Makka. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Thank you, Glory. Hi, how are you
I'm
doing?
fine. I'm just super excited that we're getting to have this conversation. I was literally scrolling through LinkedIn the other day and I saw your profile and I was just like, if there's somebody I need to talk to about this topic, it's Sarah, right? And I'm just excited we're having this conversation. But like I said at the beginning, this conversation is about what does inclusion look like for female leaders of African descent, especially in the corporate workspace. So my first question to you is, what's your inclusion story, right? Can you remember a time you actually felt included? Who was it by, and what was the situation?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me, Glory. I was sharing that I've watched you build this space of inclusion and pushing women to include themselves, grab a seat at the table, grab a chair if there's no seat for them. And I've watched you do it with such passion, dedication, and growth. So it's great to have results even for what you're doing. So thank you for having me. Thank you for creating space for me to have the story. Um,
Thank you.
I think inclusion starts in the mind. So my inclusion story is about how your mind was set. If you expect inclusion to be an external force that brings you in, I think you're starting from a wrong footing. Inclusion is really how you see yourself in spaces in which you walk, how you see yourself in spaces in which you're alive and you're navigating. So I think my first inclusion story started with my dad. And Gloria, I'm sure that
Wow.
some of this might resonate with you. We had 4 girls. My dad had 4 girls and a little boy. And so the first 4 of us had been sort of together for a long time before my brother came about. And he and my mom just felt like there was nothing the girls couldn't do. So it wasn't a sense of exclusion. You know, sometimes you feel like girls do this stuff over here and boys do these things over here. Maybe it was a context of having all girls. We just felt like, of course, we could do everything. So psychologically, we were included in conversations with adults. Psychologically, we were included in spaces. So we never thought there was a barrier to entry mentally. And I think that's where inclusion starts. And then the next place of inclusion, I think, is with my sisterhood. So I have 3 sisters. And if anyone knows me, you know my sisters. They are sort of the Amazons, the people who are navigating life with. And from a young child, I've always had space with them. There was never there is no space for you here. They've always created this enlarged environment where I can find home, I can find a place to express myself, no matter what that looked like. So again, in my formative years, inclusion was part of the story, or I should say, there was no room for exclusion. So after growing up, I entered into the real world, as they say. And I have to say, even in my high school, middle school journey, I had friends, again, who included me. We called ourselves the 4 Musketeers, and there are these 3 other ladies, and there was space for you. There was always space for your craze, and there was space for your ideas. We wanted to rule the world on motorbikes. We would wear black leather jumper suits with our motorbikes, and we'll go throughout Africa saving the continent. It was our dream. And we would build houses where, you know, our husbands would live with the kids so they have community as we went on our motorbikes. Again, crazy ideas, but there was space for crazy. There was space for whatever your dreams were. So going into the professional space, mentally, I was already set. There was no space I couldn't access. There was no rooms I wasn't allowed in. And so my mind was already like, of course I should be here. So there was already that. But then I went to school in the US, you felt like there were some spaces perhaps you shouldn't be a part of because people who looked like you weren't there. And that challenged what I understood coming from Nigeria, where of course you can be in any space. And so I started to study the environment. And one of the things I hope we get into is how do you study your environment? Because I think for inclusion, you need to know what spaces you're in and take a sit and take a step back and say, what's going on here? Who are the power brokers? Where are the channels of influence? What do you need to do? What do you not need to do? But very specifically, there are 2 people in my life who had always made room for me, and in specific ways. So, for example, I have a mentor to date who we were having conversations about the Nigerian political space. And he was like, do you want to be a part of an administration? And I was like, no, I don't believe in it. He literally like dragged me and gave me a lecture about how there needs to be spaces where alternative voices are heard. He lectured me about putting myself forward when in a time when I thought, nah, I don't want to. I ended up not accepting that role, but just the process of him saying, think about yourself differently. Think about this, and I will be in the space to guide you, even if you don't speak the language of politics or administration. It's like someone who goes to bat for you, who actually sees your future because you've deposited your dreams and your thoughts and your journey with them. They see ahead of you and they say, no, you fit in this space, even when you think, I'm not sure I want to be in this space. So I'm eternally grateful for the sponsors I have who are like, pick up the phone and say, hey, there's something you need to be a part of. And even if I push back and say, I'm not sure, they say, I'm sure. So let's get in and figure out how to get you in. I also remember of late memory, Kate was a colleague and a senior colleague I had worked with in one of the consulting firms. And she felt like I was supposed to be part of a group of young people in international development. And here I was, I didn't even know the thing existed, but she had worked with me, and we had worked together in close huddles, kind of figuring out how to get this minister to say yes to this thing that was going to be good for Nigerians. And when she saw the post, she sent me a note and said, "I think you should apply for this." And I thought, okay. And she went one step further and said, "You know what? I'm going to get someone to recommend you." She ended up getting Tony Blair to recommend me for this presentation, for this award. I'm just sitting here, just like minding my own business. And she's going to bat for me in the highest and best ways.
Mm.
So I end by saying inclusion is mental. It's a mental space, but inclusion is also the people who see you and who will go to bat for you and drag you into spaces that sometimes you don't think you're supposed to be, or you don't think you're ready for. And they have seen what you can do, and they say, "Oh no, you're ready. And if you need help along the way, we will guide you." We're not supposed to do our professional lives alone. It's not how it's supposed to be. We're not supposed to do anything alone, quite frankly. We're community animals. We're supposed to be in herds. So where's your group? Where's your tribe? Where's your community? And I really think our community needs to have people who are 20 years ahead, our peers 20 years behind. So we can bring those along who have not yet reached where we are. We can have people who we can be in the same space with, and they're those who have gone before us that can show us the way. So that's my inclusion story.
That's so amazing, because it shows the length and breadth of what inclusion looks like, right? Inclusion, from what I'm hearing, it's not one thing. It's from parenthood, from when you're a little girl. It's from the relationships you form as you go through life, right? It's from people that go to bat for you, people that see you beyond the capacity with which you see yourself, right? It is spaces that allow you to thrive, right? And environments that allow you to thrive. So inclusion can look like anything, right? And there's no one specific thing. And you're so right. My dad, when I was thinking about what is my inclusion story, certainly my inclusion story is in fact, maybe it's only him that is on that that is on that pedestal. You know what I mean? So definitely. So thank you for sharing that. Guys, if you're just joining the conversation, we're talking about what does inclusion really look like for female leaders of African descent. Please put your name and your city that you're joining in from in the chat, and we'll be sure to introduce you. Okay, Sarah, so we talked about what inclusion looks like, but let's talk about the barriers. So I really feel that for women of African descent, especially those in the corporate sector, they face a diverse set of challenges. And some of these challenges are very intricate, right? From social cultural that hold us back. So I want to discuss with you, and whether you want to speak about the things that have held you back or what you're aware of, but what are some of the issues that hold women back in the workplace?
Sure. I mean, I think we need to be clear about, are we saying women of African descent in our domestic workplace in Nigeria? Are we saying women of African descent in global spaces? Because I do think that the challenges can be unique depending on where you are. So maybe I'll speak to domestic workplaces, and I'll speak a little bit to global workspaces. And for either of them, it starts in the mind. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's the way you see yourself that you need to do. The work is internal on inclusion and in what hinders you. I have a mentor that says, don't negotiate against yourself and tell yourself a no first before the world tells you a no. Like you're sitting in your house thinking, should I do this? Nah, I really can't. I'm not supposed. You've negotiated against yourself. You've had the conversation. You've decided that you're not going to do it. So I would say that that's a huge barrier for people. It's not even the external environment. It's the dialogue and the conversations that you're having inside your head that you set up all the barriers. Oh, I can't do it. I have young children. Oh, I can't do it. I don't have any children. Oh, I can't do it. I'm married. Oh, I can't do it. I have 5 kids. What are those things that you've said to yourself? Oh, I can't do it, because those things hinder you before anyone else on the external decides to hinder you. In our domestic space, I actually have to say that growing up, Nigerian women are formidable in the workplace. Like you hear these strong voices. So I don't accept the narrative fully that there is no space for women of African descent in our domestic workplaces. Because everywhere you turn, you see patterns of women who use their voice to speak out, of women who have ascended the highest levels of their professional career, of women who are in banking, in fast moving consumer goods, in oil and gas. You see patterns. And the number one obstacle after your mind is what you see. Do you see a pattern of what's out there that you can emulate? And even if you don't see that, if your mind is right, you become the pattern that you want others to emulate. So you're like, you know what? If I haven't seen the first woman bus driver, motorway driver, which I have seen, then I'm going to be that. If I haven't seen the first woman leader of a biker squad in Nigeria, then I'm going to be that, because that's your passion. If you haven't seen the first woman who decides to create, the space program in Nigeria, then you're going to be that. Is it going to take you time? Of course. Will you get there? If your mind is right and you set it up right, why not? So I also don't give into the narrative that there are these insurmountable obstacles, because people have surmounted many obstacles. But coming tactically to some obstacles is getting guidance. I think I really believe we are community beings. We were made to thrive in community. So when you start isolating yourself, whether professionally or personally, it's always a litmus test, a sign that something is happening and it's not going to end well. So find people who you can get guidance from, whether it's learning a new space like I did when I went to the US. It was like, okay, this space is different. I was the first person in my family to go to the US. My parents had never been there. So they just literally I felt like I was dropped from a parachute, like just go in the middle, figure it out. I was like, oh, okay, guess we got to figure this thing out. So being a very adaptable creature, enter a space and say, what's happening here? Well, it sounds like this is what's going on. It sounds like this is what's lauded. Results are lauded. It sounds like sometimes results are not lauded because there's some politics there. And you know yourself. So I'm not saying adapt and become a lower version of yourself, because there's some spaces that are toxic. And also there's something you said, Dr. Gloria, in the beginning, which is there's a space that allows you to express your full self. And there's some spaces that don't. So it's up to you quickly to identify, is this a space that will allow me to express my full, authentic self? Or is this a place that won't? And the beauty is that there's always a place for you. Don't think, oh, I've looked at all the banks and actually I don't think I can thrive in banks. Actually, look at that again. I'm sure there's a bank in there that can allow you to show up fully. So where you're getting your intel, where you're getting guidance to really surmount some obstacles. And then I'll say two more things. One is where you have been, what are your results? Results speak louder than anyone could share, like anyone could up their ante and do PR on. Just drop your results there. They just start speaking and then ricochets. Sometimes I think we have been socialized as women or as people of color or people of African descent that sometimes you just put your head down and you get the results done. Yes, it's true, but that's not the full story. The full story, you get the results and then you communicate those results. You use Dr. Glory's platforms like LinkedIn and you communicate those results, right? Let me be honest. Let me put my vulnerability up. I actually think that social media makes you braggadocious. Oh, I did this and I did that. And it's like, come on, people.
We've had conversations about this.
Yes, exactly. Can we just pipe down? Like everyone calm down. But the truth of the matter is there's so much white noise in the atmosphere. There's so much happening that you do need to craft your own voice. What do you want to say to the world about who you are and what you have to offer, what you've done? And I think you can craft that message with dignity, honor, and humility while not looking at yourself as less than you are. So you said something interesting. You said, I was scrolling through LinkedIn and I saw this. If I didn't put that post, because my last post before then was probably 3 months ago. I've been quiet. Like I go to LinkedIn like someone who's like lives in Scandinavia and it's 6 months of dark and 6 months of light. 6 months I'm like, woo! The next 6 months I'm like, you guys, I need to rest because I can't do this thing.
Hilarious.
So, but what is telling me is when you have results to share, when you have processes that you're proud of, LinkedIn is kind of like you're building a resume of who you are. You're introducing yourself to the world. I am this person. I love results. I showcase results. I work hard for
Mm.
them. I bring others in. I think it's important that we have a narrative about Africa that's positive. So that's what the communicating the results are. And then the last thing I said, I know I said two. So it's get results in where you are, and everyone is in a place. So where are you? And
Mhm.
do you have results to show for it? It's your own personal resume. Some people spend so much time making noise and there's no results. So if you make so
Mm.
much noise and you don't have results, it comes back to catch up with you eventually. So you have to be very clear with yourself. And I love a saying that you carry yourself everywhere you go. So if you're over here just doing politics without results, you go over there and do politics without results again. So it behooves you as a person, a professional, to just hold a bouquet of your results. So if anyone asks you, what have you done? You
Mm.
case, XYZ, this is what happened. In this other case, this was happening. You have results for days and then communicate results. And then the last thing I'll say is, and I mentioned it earlier, find people who are doing what you're doing and pattern after them. Patterns are important. You know, when you're sewing fabric and you go to the States and it says this is a size 10 or a size 14 or a size 16, they know that because they've patterned it after some average. Now there are problems with that, and we can talk about that. It's a
Mhm.
different body, but in the spirit of efficiency, there are some patterns that work at least for most. So when you're looking at people whose lives you like, it won't work for you exact, but there's a vague pattern that their lives are taking, and you can just
Mm.
kind of set that. You don't take it hook, line, and sinker. You don't take 100% of it because you're different and you have a different path through life, but it's showing you what's possible. And patterns and possibility and imagery has a way of rejigging your mind, because remember we started with this thing is mental, and so you want to really address how your mind is seeing yourself, and patterns can shake it up and say, actually, look at the first one on the moon. You can be on the moon if you want. Sure, she was on the moon in this country and you're in this country, but she went to the moon. So figure it out. So those are some of the obstacles that we have to circumvent to make it. I will talk about patriarchy in the Nigerian space. Um, the truth of the matter is that there's been a pipeline of male leadership. I'm actually working on a project right now, and it's about voice, how we use our voice. And I was observing something interesting, that the Nigerian psyche seems to be used to hearing a male voice and linking that to authority. So when women
Mm.
speak, sometimes I don't know if it's the shrillness of the voice, I don't know if it's the height, the thinness of the voice. It's like the ear is not socialized to hear a woman's voice and authority, because look at what I did just now. I said authority and my voice went deeper, almost like a man's. And I've noticed there's some women who have some strong voices, but they're a little older. And then, you know, when you get older, testosterone starts deepening in. So your voice starts turning a little lower. So it's so interesting how we're socialized, men and women, to say, who do we listen to? Who don't we listen to? And depending on what culture you are, depending on what patterns you've seen, sometimes there is a sense that as a woman you should or you shouldn't. But quite frankly, the way I live my life, don't give that airspace. You just do your thing. Just do the results, communicate it, find your tribe, find your patterns, and keep pushing.
I love that, especially that last part about voice, right? I remember I was at a conference once, and somebody was giving a talk about unconscious bias. And he started out by asking the room, can you mention a CEO in Nigeria? And people were throwing out names, throwing out names, throwing out names. And, we didn't know what he was trying to measure. And people were
Yeah.
just throwing out names, oh, Tony Elumelu, this one, that one, all of that. And he said, do you realize that nobody mentioned a female CEO? And it really just speaks to what we ourselves, how we've
Absolutely.
been either conditioned or what we believe when it comes to authority in this country, and where we believe women should be. And these are the things that women subconsciously also struggle with. Because when you're a woman in leadership, you then find yourself trying to find your balance, because it's
Mm,
like, what does female leadership even look like? Do I have to
mm,
be this man who dominates or whatever? Or can I lead with empathy? Will that be seen as weak? So we have
yes.
these constant struggles. Is that something you have faced?
You know, as you said, we all have the unconscious bias. There's no one who is immune to having a bias. Um, but it's turning that bias into consciousness. That's when the journey really begins. So when someone says my doctor, immediately what image comes into your mind? My sister happens to be a doctor, so but sometimes I catch myself when someone says my doctor said I need to get on dialysis. I go, okay, did he say da, 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 da? He goes, it's a she. And I'm like, even me, the conscious, oh my gosh, humanity, charging forward. So it's the consciousness of what are we telling ourselves? Again, it's back to that inner dialogue. What are we telling the next generation? When are we telling our environment? So I just came from a conference in Zimbabwe, and there's this 11-year lecture that this organization has. And thankfully, I was close to the person who was organizing it. And he was on stage reeling off all the people who were speakers. And I wrote the names down. They all sound like men names. And at the end, I said, Uncle, you mean for 11 years you've not had one woman? He goes, no, we haven't. I said, this is going to change. So you know what we're going to do? I'm going to get you a list of 100 women and you're going to pick. And he's like, yeah, make sure they can. I said, don't you worry. I said, it's an indictment. I said, it's an indictment on African women that you couldn't find one in 11 years to speak on this platform. And thankfully, we have conscious people in leadership who are conscious about gender balancing. Because, we're entering into a terrain, and this is a sidebar. This day is beautiful, International Women's Day, and I celebrate you, Dr. Gloria. I celebrate the women out there. But we're tensioning the men, man. They're like, what is it now? What happened? Why you can't even have International Men's Day? Like, what's going on? The men are feeling a little like, do we have space in this world? They're not feeling included, shall we say. So we also want to include the men. Men out there listening, we're including you. You're worthful. You have lots of value. There's space for you. We just want to share space with you. That's all we're asking for. And so he said, you know what? We're going to get a woman. That's how we break the barriers of unconscious bias. It's saying, actually, I noticed this. It's noticing, it's calling out, and it's supporting to make sure there's a bit more balance in there. As far as myself, is there a place where I've experienced unconscious bias? I'm sure. But the thing about the matter is you don't accept a label that you have not put on yourself. Or I'll say the reverse. You only accept a label that you put on yourself. So even if the world puts a label on you, or, there's a caricature on the media of who you're supposed to be or how you're supposed to show up, or your parents, or even someone of authority put a label on you, your job is only to filter the labels that you accept. So if you accept the label that a woman XYZ, you have accepted it. If you don't accept it, you haven't. And whatever you accept, you work in the direction of that acceptance. So we have to be really careful and really aware, self-awareness of what limitations we have told ourselves about what other people's biases out there are doing, because what you believe is your business. What I do is mine. So it's taking the reins back to say, here's the direction I want to go. I'm going to study to figure out how to get there. I'm going to have patterns and guidance along the way. And I'm going to die trying to get there. And if you believe women are supposed to be there, that sounds like a personal problem. So you need to deal with that. But I'm on my journey, and I'm going to create this journey to look like how I want it to look like.
I love that. That sounds like a you problem, not a me problem. We are unconscious bias, I remember yesterday I was actually watching this really powerful video from a woman who used to be one of the Secret Service agents that actually guarded Obama. She has this book that says How to Be Bulletproof. And she was talking about an experience where very senior Secret Service agent came, and they were all lined up, and he was saying hello to everyone, shaking everyone by the hand. And when it got to her turn, he actually skipped her. And she said that day she was actually, the president was out and about, and said she could have spent her time thinking, how do I get this man to respect me? Why didn't he shake my hand? That was so rude. But her job that day was to keep the president alive. So it was, do I keep the president alive, or do I spend time about thinking, how am I going to make this man respect me? And she focused on her job, which is her results, right? So sometimes it's not about this thing that we do where we're fighting the opposition. We have to support, but we also have to learn what labels we actually attach to ourselves based on other people's stereotypes. So I love that. I love that. I'm going to move now
Yeah.
to the next question, which is we've talked about problems, talked about challenges. Let's talk about some solutions. You've already started alluding to some of this already when you were mentioning, having people that can go to bat for you. And so I just want to talk about what should mentorship and sponsorship, right, for African women, in
Mhm.
executive leadership positions. What can that look like to help them climb the career ladder?
Gosh, I've been so blessed with mentors and sponsors in my life. Um, and for me, the way I've approached this is for mentors, you don't have to know me for you to be my mentor. All I'm doing is I'm tracking you. I'm tracking what you're saying. I'm tracking how you're living. I'm tracking the books you're writing, the articles you're showcasing. Again, because we are all so unique in this world and we have such a unique path. That's why speaking is important. That's why using your voice is important, because you don't know who's listening to your. You say, oh, it's a little old story, no one cares. No, actually, you could be showing someone how to do something because their lives are similar to yours. So back to my plug for what Dr. Gloria is doing. That's a wonderful platform to express your voice and to maybe
Love it.
showcase what others can emulate through your life. So I don't want I want to really emphasize that you do have a unique voice to share. So being able to see what people are doing up close, and when you get a chance, asking them the odd one or two questions, that's mentorship for me. I mean, podcasts,
Mm,
I mean, written words, I mean, all kinds of things, just to because people have gone ahead. I have no qualms knowing that in my 40s, there are people in their 60s who I'm like, you have had 20 years above me. So what did the 40s look like? Like, tell me about it. Like, what were you doing? And it's not saying I'm going to do exactly that, because when they were 40 is not how today's 40s are. But it's saying they've gone ahead of me and there's some wisdom they can share with me. So being able to be intentional about knowing people who have gone ahead is really important. And there is an intentionality about it. I think sponsors are different. And I talked about my inclusion stories, and really those are sponsors, people who will argue against my own self-limitation about the things I've placed and said, oh, I can't work with them. They don't speak the language I speak. And it's like, my friend, will you come on, speak this language here and I'll teach you how to speak it. But what's unique about the sponsors is they have been a witness to my career journey, or I have been in the trenches with them. There is no way someone can sponsor you without knowing you, without knowing how you show up when things are bad, how you show up when things are good, knowing how you express yourself, knowing your results. People will not sponsor you without knowledge of you. So who are you in a journey, in a partnership with? Who are you expressing? I have a
mm,
friend of mine who is a an influencer in Nigeria, a doctor. She's got into finance as well. Every year, she writes a letter to her mentors, and she thanks them
mm,
for all the things they've done. She chronicles the big ways in which she won, the things she failed at. So she's not waiting for a chat and a meeting. She's being proactive.
wow. So
Every
powerful.
year she's writing it. She's saying, thank you so much for this. This is what I did this year that was really life changing. These are the things that I was like, oh, I shouldn't have done those things. But guess what? They're witnesses to her life, because she
Mm,
is in their mind. And when there's something big happens, they can say, oh yes, I remember when she did this, she did that, she did the other. And she's learning, and she's being vulnerable in a space because she believes that these people are her tribe. These are her people. They're senior, but they're her
mm,
people. So that's the
mm,
common denominator for sponsorship. So you do have to be able to express yourself and express what you bring to the table. Everybody's looking for value. There is no
mm,
space in this world who are not looking for value. The question to you is, do you provide value in the spaces in which you work? Having a job is not the same thing as providing value. Let's be very clear. Having a job can be, I have a paycheck, I go to the space and I sit here and I do XYZ. Providing value is a completely different game. And so for you as a professional in whatever space it is, whether it's Nigeria or in a global space, is what value are you truly providing? Can you beat your chest and say, this is the value I'm providing? Because you should be able to. I had another friend who she every time there was a win, she had a little Excel sheet and she would put all her wins on the Excel sheet. Because you know how there's
mm,
something called recency bias. when you're doing a performance evaluation, you remember the last 2 months of a person or your colleague. You're like, yeah, in the last 2 months, you really took it out the park, or in the last 2 months, I didn't see you. But she says she's not going to wait for any recency bias. So she's every time she wins, she puts it in an Excel sheet. So when time for appraisal comes, she goes, in January, I did this, and it happened to do this. In February, I did this amazing thing. And because it's December, and her boss might not remember that in January she did this, she remembers. So she is keeping track of her own wins, because no one will tell her something that she doesn't already know. So if you're saying, oh, look at me, I'm my hands, I'm not doing, if you don't feel like you're providing value, start providing it. Start chronicling those values. Start putting them together so that you can showcase them whenever the chance comes.
I love that. I love that. I think that's so intentional. I say it in a different way. I say professional amnesia. We all have it,
Mm,
we always forget the great things that we do, and we have the negativity bias where
yeah.
we're constantly fixated on the negative things or the mistakes we've made. So I just love that idea of having that Excel spreadsheet and just putting it. In fact, when you said it, I said to myself, you know what, I'm going to be I'm going to have an email subject that says my wins. And every time somebody sends me a message or whatever testimonial, I just email it to myself, my wins, my wins, just to remember.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Let's talk now more about inclusive workspaces and what corporate organizations
Mhm.
can do. So we've talked about on the individual level, right? What mentorship is not this thing that has to be inclusive for female leaders. And I love what you said about mentorship is not this thing that has to be in close proximity, right? So like the lady's story I shared, she could be my mentor. Just reading her book and learning from her, that could be mentorship. So I love that
Yeah.
idea. But then what about corporate organizations? How can they start to create inclusive spaces for female leaders?
Yeah, it's such a wonderful question. And I think that's why the edge for a gender balance in our society is so important, because every space, I believe every space, whether it's a national assembly, it's the executive arm of the government, is our corporate boardrooms, is our corporate middle management, our corporate lower rung, every space must reflect society. That's how you know a space is healthy. So if we have 10% of people who are disabled, and a space doesn't have 10% of people who are disabled, it's not quite reflecting society. If we have 51% of society who are women, and a space has 90% of people who are men, it's a broken space. I will beat my chest to say it's not reflecting how society is. And when that's not happening, we're skewed, we're tilted. So when corporates are assessing their inclusion, does it reflect society? It's not about, oh, the women are fighting for more space. It's about a appropriate reflection of the society in which we live. And the reason that's important is we bring that sensibility and make things stronger. If you go to banks now, let's say we have, and I don't know the percentage, let's say we have 10% who who need support walking, and you go to banks and you see a flight of stairs. I promise you, if there was someone on the board who was in a wheelchair, they'd say, we're going to fix the stairs, aren't we? So I can get upstairs to the 11th floor to have this meeting, right? Like they will just make it better to a more reflective society. So for corporates, I think there are three things I want to say. The first is the intentionality of making sure your space can nurture what society looks like. So that therefore, if women are 51%, I believe the percentage is 51% women. Really, our corporate spaces should be about 51% women. We can manage 50-50, but we can't manage anything less than that. So if it's less than that, it's an unhealthy space. You're doing something wrong. I think it was the CEO of Pepsi. Yeah, I believe it was her. Her name is, let me recall, I think it's
Indira.
Indira, exactly. Indira
Is it
Nooyi.
Indira?
Yeah, Indira Nooyi
Yeah.
said, the biological clock is mismatched with the career path. So in the time when women should be rising up the path, they're having children, which is a very unique experience that men don't get to experience. So what does that look like? If the biological clock does not match the career path, then organizations need to they need to know that if you're looking for women in spaces and they're hitting a certain age range and you want them to be included, you need to create space like a crèche for kids. I've also heard that women who have had kids are the most efficient workers, because guess what? There's a lot more demand for their time. So they cut through the white noise and they're like, we got to get this done. So you're not even sacrificing efficiency because someone has had a kid, which sometimes you think. You're not even doing that. What you're doing is you're creating an environment where this woman can give you the best and the brightest of herself while also sharing with this new life she's brought in a way that a man cannot perhaps be a lot more efficient because he hasn't had kids, or he's not in that space of nurture.
He hasn't had to balance his time in that manner.
Exactly. So how does an intentional workspace work on that? For me, she's just come out of maternity leave. Her kid is going to be very important to her. Is there a space where in between meetings she can go breastfeed? Is there a space where in between meetings she can go check on the child within her space? Have you created that so that you can get the best from this woman and you don't push her out of the workspace because she's had a child? So those are some unique things that women go through, that the career path needs to be intentional about matching and supporting. And guess what? After that season of her life, she's flying. I remember reading about Nancy Pelosi, who decided to remove herself from the workplace altogether. And she waited till her kids were grown and her grandkids, and then she entered Congress and was just kicking ass. I mean, I don't know if you can see that on live TV. But she was
quickly moving on.
She was taking numbers and she was doing her thing. So there's nothing that women can't do. The corporate space needs to understand the mismatch. The corporate space needs to understand the nuance. Does it cost more? Let's be honest, it does. Is the ROI higher? Let's be honest, it is. The math, research upon research, statistical, scientific research tells you having a woman on boards in top management, in middle management, creates more revenue for an organization. So why would you leave them out because there's something that you can control? Then the second thing I'll say, for women who are in those spaces, being able to reflect adequately and bring your full self to that space. And that's why I'm really anti-women becoming men to get ahead. Like you watch how men get ahead and you're like, okay, I'm going to be brash or whatever. You're going to be anti yourself, however you show. If you're brash naturally, it's all good. But because you're trying to you're inching your way in, you've mimicked what another gender is doing. I think that we're leaving value on the table. We were all created so uniquely that bring your full self. That's why it's so important to have a place where you can be fully yourself. You can, because there is uniqueness embedded within you that the world needs and you need to unleash. But if you stifle that because you're unsure that will they really accept it, or you stifle that because you have not honed it to be the best version of that essence. Sometimes we're ambitious and we're go-getters, but we ram people in the wake of getting what we need to get, and people are the most important things. So how do you refine that ambition so that you uphold people on your journey to greatness? You're not like trampling over them because you get to go. There's work for us to do for our gifting, but when you get there, how do you show up for other women? How do you show up not even for other women, for just the other that reflect what society looks like? So if you look around and there are not enough women in the space, like I looked around and after 11 years, there wasn't one competent, well-spoken African woman that can showcase in this global platform. Oh no. So I had to speak up. I was like, we're gonna have to fix this, aren't we? Because this ain't right. So how are you using your voice in those spaces to bring more women along, to showcase the value? And it's not a sentimental, it's a girl club. It's a very crisp focus on return on investment, because we know that the more reflective an organization is of the people it's serving, and every organization is serving people, the more reflective of the people the organization is serving, the better it performs. So we're just trying to make sure our corporate spaces perform better. And for that reason, we need to reflect society with the competence and the proportions that are in our society. So for me, it's a very simple equation, but there's work for us to do on ourselves. There's work for us to do as a corporate space, and there's work for us to do emulating and making sure we're bringing our voice to spaces where the spaces are not quite right.
I love that. I think, you were able to touch on so many dimensions with that response, including what organizations need to do, but how we as women even need to show up in those spaces. Serah, can you still hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay,
And
fantastic. Great. So, Sarah, we literally have 7 more minutes. I can't believe we've spent already an hour. Well, we literally have 7 more minutes. And I wanted to ask this question, and it's a double question. So, the question is, how, and it's something that you had mentioned you would speak about earlier, and it's, I firmly believe, right, that I want to walk into like WH Smith's or Waterstones or whatever and see books and see books written by women of African descent on the bestseller list.
I've lost your audio.
To function in the workplace. But I feel like there's so much worked on in global spaces. What are some of the challenges? Question. Hi, Sarah. Can you hear me?
I can.
Fantastic. Did you get my question? So it was
I
a
did
double
not.
whammy question. Okay,
Okay.
my question was, how can women of African descent attract global roles, leadership roles? And what are some of the challenges and how can we sort of circumvent those challenges? Yeah.
Sure. It's a good question. You know, having been in a global space for going to, I don't know now, 10, 12 years, I fell into it. It was I just fell into it. I wasn't intentional about it. On this side of my career, though, I do think there are ways we can be more intentional about it. I'll go back to what you're doing, Dr. Gloria, using LinkedIn to showcase what people are doing. And Dr. Gloria and I go way back, but I'm not just plugging her because we're doing this womanhood thing, which I love to do with her. I'm plugging her because there's value in what she's doing. Um, Being able to showcase your results because the online is a global space is really, really important. Dr. Glory, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Great. So being able to showcase your results with your intended audience. And the good news is that the social media platforms have global audiences. So if someone is looking for you in Tokyo, how will they find you? They're not going to come necessarily to your house to see what you're doing at your desk in your office. They're going to figure out what you're doing from LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever the platforms are, where your audience is. So my first thing is find out where your audience is and make sure you're showcasing in those spaces. The second thing is showcase your results. Again, I don't know how to say this in different ways. I'm saying this, and I'm also a victim of my own sort of lack of showcasing. I don't do that as much as I should, I'll be honest. But I'm learning that you have to showcase your results. A senior colleague of mine was recently appointed in a global role, and she didn't apply for it. She got headhunted. So people had seen her track record of results over the years. They wanted to fill the space with someone that was like her, and they called her up and said, "Hey, do you want this role?" She
Wow.
also was to make sure she was consistent, and there's something about consistency because sometimes you feel like it should just happen, but sometimes it takes 10 years. I actually have a 10-year goal. I need to be somewhere in 10 years. I've actually started planning it. So I've given myself a 10-year leadway, like, okay, this is where you're going to be. This is what age you're going to be when you're there. And in 10 years, how do I start working now for 10 years hence? It's giving yourself the breath of time to just build slowly, because sometimes there's an anxiety driven building that I reject. I'm not trying to be like the Joneses. I'm not like, oh my gosh, look at what they're doing. No. Everyone's on their pace. You have a timeline. What do you want to do? Give yourself enough space so that you can be consistent. There's something about the consistency, there's something about the patience and longevity of time to help you build your case. You know, when I was younger, in my 20s, I was as part of the board of Harvard Kennedy School. And not the board, sorry, the admissions committee. So we actually got to figure out who got into Harvard. And there was a secret nugget that I always remember, which was there are people who said, I want to do this. And we would check to say, how long have they been doing the thing? Then you will find out when she was 15, she was doing water in her village. Then she was 18, then she was head of the water community. Then she was 20, then she was doing water engineering. Now she's 22 and she's still doing water something. She's been doing that since 15. So there's no doubt whatsoever that this woman is doing this thing. And it becomes so compelling that we as a committee will say, yeah. She's really going to do this thing after she leaves. It's not like someone who says yesterday, I want to go to Mars. Okay, you look through their career. Have you been studying, space and the rest for a while? No, I just woke up yesterday and I want to do this tomorrow. We have a lot less faith that you're actually going to do the thing you're going to say you're doing, because what Harvard wants to do is to propel you to the place you want to be and, say we took some credit for it, but, tongue in cheek. So, but my thing is, where is your track record of results and success? And if you're not building that intentionally, you need to build it. Because what people are going to use to propel you to the international bodies are your results, your networks, your track record. And the good news of all of this is you are in the driver's seat of all of this. You get to determine, do I want to be there or not? So you just need time, you need intentionality, you need the right networks, you need the right results, and you'll make it happen. Because the equity in being a woman of color is high. The world is, we have been, the pipeline for women of color is low. We haven't had a lot in the pipeline. And it's all about, a pipeline will determine whether in the future we see more people out there. Are we building the pipeline? We are in the pipeline. Wow. More people need to be building the pipeline because there's not enough. So the beauty is that if we find someone who's good and strong and competent, there's space for you. There's space for you. So we are in the driver's seat of that. So for me, it's a very encouraging outlook because I know it's true. I see it happen around me all the time.
Serah, for me, right, when I'm having these conversations, sometimes, even though, yes, I'm facilitating the conversation, sometimes I feel the conversations are really for me. So like this last answer, you don't know how you freed me, like with some of the things you said. So for example, when you said, I reject anxiety-driven growth, because especially with this social media era, there is this idea to keep moving, to strive,
Yes.
What is my success? Yes. What is this? What is that? And everything. And it does create a lot of angst. Yes. And so one of the things you said is I reject, and when you said it, I said it after, you're like, yes, I reject anxiety during growth. I reject it, And then the second thing you said was about, there is equity for women of color, but we are building that pipeline. We need to build that pipeline. And for me, it has helped me to see my role in that I am helping to build that pipeline of women of African descent. And It is not it's not a microwave journey.
No,
it is not. And if we look at, look at the world and see how many women of Africa, of color do we have, and what is their representation in leadership globally, right? So this is something that has to be reflective of the world we want to see, right? Yes. So thank you for that. Thank you. So those are my two. I had many takeaways, but those are two important takeaways that literally liberated me. Awesome. Serah, as always, we always have great conversations. We speak once every 5 years, but when we do have great conversation. This has been a fantastic conversation around what inclusivity looks like. I love how we started the story from what your inclusivity story is, right? And it just helped us to see what inclusion looks like. We also talked about challenges, but even in those challenges, we talked about how to create our own spaces and how this is a mental thing. So yes, the world is creating spaces for us to feel included, but what are we doing that is excluding ourselves, right? We talked about track record, right? How are you communicating your track record? How are you building your networks? How are you connecting with sponsors? And how are you communicating those things, right? And we've spoken now about anxiety-driven growth, right? And that this is, and whether it's for your career, so whoever's listening to this, whether it's for your career, your business, whatever the case is, right? It's not, we're not microwaving this thing.
Yeah.
We're in it for the long haul. But we also
Correct.
talked about men who are supporting women, right? We're not
Yes.
trying to take everything. This is inclusion is about all of us, right? It's about all of us. So, and
Exactly.
for the men that are wondering, International Men's Day is actually on the 17th of November. So there is one, just in case you're wondering. So thank you so much, Serah. This has been amazing. A great conversation. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for sharing. And I'm seeing some of the comments in the chat. Miss says, great presentation. This is deep. Very good self-reflective question around what's your track record and results of success. So thank you so much, Serah.
Dr. Glory, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Keep doing the work. You're doing God's work in many ways, preparing us for a pipeline of greatness and teaching us how to show up in these spaces. So I'm honored to be speaking with you on International Women's Day and here to more.
Fantastic, fantastic. All right, guys, I have another conversation coming up with different women, but this I just had to start with this, and this has been fantastic. Thank you very much, Serah. Have a fantastic day and happy International Women's Day again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Same to you. Bye, everyone.